Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. And we are thrilled to have this turnout. You lucky ones that got seats, we had to turn away quite a few people. So well done. My name is Madeline Fitzgerald, and I am the manager of adult programming here at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. Thank you again for joining us this evening for our talk with Laura Wilson on the exhibition Richard Avedon at the Carter. On behalf of the museum, I would especially like to welcome and thank our members who are in the audience this evening. It is because of your generosity that our collection and special exhibitions are free and open to everyone. If you are not currently a member, I encourage you to join after the talk by visiting the membership table right outside the library in the atrium. Or you can join by going to our website at cartermuseum.org. I would like to thank the Art Bridges Foundation's Access for All program for their generous support of Second Thursdays at the Carter. Every second Thursday, you can connect with art through cocktails, conversations, and creativity. Each month, you'll find something different, from performances, artist talks, unique tours, to art making, music, and films. Richard Avedon at the Carter is organized by the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, and we want to especially thank the Leo Podeshman Foundation for their support of this exhibition. I would also like to thank the staff at Hired Hands for providing American Sign Language interpretation for tonight's talk. Thank you. As a reminder, if you haven't already, please take this time to silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices that you may have on you this evening. Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers this evening. Joining Andrew J. Walker, the Carter's executive director, is artist Laura Wilson. Laura Wilson is a photographer and author whose work has appeared in various publications, including The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Vanity Fair, GQ, London's Sunday Times Magazine, and the Washington Post Magazine. Her books include Watt Matthews of Lamb's Head from 1989, revised and reissued in 2019, Hutterites of Montana, published in 2000, Avedon at Work in the American West from 2003, Grit and Glory, Six-Man Football, also published in 2003, That Day Pictures in the American West from 2015, From Rodin to Plensa, Modern Sculpture at the Meadows Museum, published in 2018, and The Writers, Portraits by Laura Wilson from 2022, and Roaming Mexico, published this year. She was awarded the Royal Photographic Society of England's Book of the Year for Avedon at Work. Wilson's latest project is an exploration of Mexico based on decades of travel across the border and will be exhibited at the Meadows Museum at Southern Methodist University later this fall. Immediately following Laura and Andrew's conversation this evening, we will transition into a Q&A with all of you. I will have a microphone, which will allow for your questions to be heard in the recording of this talk. We will be uploading a recording of tonight's conversation onto the Carter's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. So if you have any friends that didn't make it inside, please let them know. It'll be up in a couple of weeks. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Walker and Laura Wilson.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you, Madeline. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you, Laura, for being here this evening. There's a distinctive quality of this evening and the show in noting Laura's influence and really your responsibility in helping to navigate this important artist who probably hadn't spent too much time in Texas prior to the commission by the Amon Carter Museum. But I've always known you first as your own artist. And of course, it always had an adjacency to Richard Avedon's work in the American West. But it was in 2015 when we hosted, along with the partnership of the Clement Center at SMU, your project that day, which was a tremendous experience for the museum. And for me, really demonstrated this depth of creativity that you brought to your medium. So before we talk about Richard, I wondered if you might just share with the audience a little bit about that project. And John Rohrbach, who was the longstanding curator here, was the individual who really sort of managed and worked with you on that project. So we have two experts on that project here this evening.
Do you mean the work with Dick?
No, with that day.
With that
a little
day.
bit about that day.
Well, Andrew Graybill, a very enterprising young professor at SMU, thought it would be a good idea for SMU to do a book on the West. And so he spoke to John, I think here, and John was willing to show the work. And it was very exciting for us to be able to show work that I had done over 35 years in the American West.
So it really
projects
was
that I'd become obsessed with by being introduced to some things through working with Richard Avedon, and then having the opportunity to go back and photograph the Hutterites of Montana, for instance, or six-man football, or those things that seem particularly unusual here in the American West. I was able to look at in depth, and it was wonderful to be able to show the work here. Thank you, John.
And it sort of begs the question from my perspective, Laura, given your responsibilities in the American West Project and then the arc of your career, how would you describe Richard Avedon's influence on your aesthetic, on your photographic process?
Well, his influence was enormous, as you can imagine. I mean, just the white paper. A portrait of someone, how do you ever photograph someone against anything other than white paper once you've been exposed to that? Because it's a graphically very powerful way to do a portrait. And but I have tried, and all of us who worked for Dick over the years have tried very hard to get out from under the burden of having him as our mentor. And I had him for 6 years, and then continued my friendship with him until he died in San Antonio. He wanted very much to come back here to Texas. And I said, oh, let's go someplace else. Let's go to Nevada, because he was doing a big project for the New Yorker. And but we ended up coming back here, and this is where he died. And so.
Here in Texas?
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. And he was a big fan of Louis L'Amour books. So I think it was, his heart belonged here.
That is so funny. So on that notion and kind of backpedaling a little bit, how did you get involved in the project? I mean, it wasn't natural, right, necessarily. What was the process by which you became his assistant on this commission?
Well, I was always admired his work very much, as any young American photographer anywhere in the world would admire. He was at the time, and this was when he began the project. This is what he looked like when he began the project. I mean, he was the most famous photographer in the world, and that wouldn't have pleased everyone to hear that, because people who liked different kinds of photography might have said someone else, but Dick dominated the world of photography, more than just fashion. I mean, it was portrait photography, where he had big exhibitions at the Metropolitan and in various other museums around the country. And so how it began was Mitch Wilder was a very entrepreneurial and bright, and he wanted a lot for the Amon Carter Museum, and so he hired my husband to look for different sources of income, so that the museum wouldn't be completely dependent upon the Amon Carter family.
Right. And
so Bob was working with Mitch on several projects, and he said, wouldn't it be a great idea? Because he was the first photographer to appear on the cover of Newsweek magazine, which was huge. I mean, the idea of who would ever think a photographer would be on the cover of a national news magazine? So Bob, my husband, said, wouldn't it be a good idea? Why don't we get him to do a series of portraits of people in the West? And so they went to New York and spoke with Avedon, and he said, well, I'd be very interested to do that, because it was at a point in his career where he was interested in turning away from the world of fashion and people of great accomplishment. And he was interested in completing a portrait which he had begun doing work in the civil rights in the South during the 60s on civil rights. And so he was interested in going to other parts of the United States. And of course, anyone who read Louis L'Amour when he was a young man would definitely want to come to Texas. So.
And did that then, so your introduction came through that process?
Yes, yeah. So I, as I said, admired his work very much, and I thought, gosh, I'd really love to work for him. And so I wrote him a note and, agonized over the note and what do I say, blah, blah, blah.
Do you still have that note somewhere?
No.
Or is it in our archive? I don't know.
But I thought, well, I probably won't hear from him. But I got a phone call immediately. It seemed as if the letter just got to New York, and he picked up the phone and called and said, well, why don't we go to Sweetwater for this rattlesnake roundup? Because they had already, Mitch Wilder and he had already decided that they would begin the project by that Dick would go take a sort of exploratory trip to Sweetwater, to the rattlesnake roundup.
Had you ever been?
No, I hadn't. But it's, as you know, from going from the airport to Sweetwater is about 3.5 hours, I think, maybe. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to sit in the car with him for this whole time. And he chatted away and was immediately appealing and accessible. And so I got over my hesitation about working for him. And he hired me right away. I think that's something that a photographer, that they have this ability to kind of size things up fast. And be careful of photographers, because they're judgmental and they're quick to decide. And so anyway, that's how he happened to. I thought, well, he'll maybe think about this for a month or so, but no.
He knew right then and there. Do you have a sense of what it was in Sweetwater that captivated him? Was it the people? Was it the...
Yeah. The portrait of the boy holding the snake, I mean, that's an amazing picture. And in the history of photography, it has to be one of the most unusual portraits.
Yes.
And that came from Sweetwater. And I think Dick right away knew, I mean, this was discussing it with Mitch Wilder, knew right away that he didn't want to do senators and people of prominence in the West. He wanted to do hardworking laborers. And so I was hired to to do the research on where would we find uranium mining, where would we find tunnel coal mining, where would we find rattlesnake roundups.
I love that. Over the course of the commission, which was, as you indicated,
it was very unusual for a photographer, for an artist to be commissioned 5 years in advance. Amon Carter never saw the work until he came back after the first summer. So they were taking that was Mitch Wilder. I mean, he was just great. He was a photographer himself, and so he had a sense of the possibilities.
He was a real entrepreneur.
Yes.
Uncelebrated enough, I believe, in the annals of museum history anyway, but perhaps that's for a new project down the road. But over the course of that commission, you and Dick traveled to, I believe it was about 18 states.
17 different states.
And that's a lot of people and a lot of land to have covered. So I was always curious, and thinking about our conversation tonight was, what was the actual process by which you picked your subjects?
well, we went to play. Dick said, I don't want to go where there's just one or two people. I want to go where there are large groups of people so we can walk around and really look and see. And and he would choose what who he wanted to photograph. So this is an example of the setup. This is at a rodeo in Augusta, Montana. And it was called the wildest one-day rodeo in America, and it really is. I mean, it was amazing. So they began drinking on Friday night, and they drank all weekend long, and there was so much beer in the streets, the one single street of Augusta, Montana, by Sunday morning. But in any case, so all of the people are found, people that he found, and that he would see at a rodeo or in a public place, and that he would sort of respond to how they looked. And he said, I'm not looking for beautiful people. I'm not looking for handsome people. I'm looking for faces that will hold the wall. I'm looking for something that's heartbreaking, that will really take your breath away. And I think he certainly did that in this collection of 124 photographs. But this is how it was done. The camera, as you can see, is a big Deerdorf camera, 8 by 10 inch negative, which, and you see the glass on the back of the camera into which the negative is put. And the photographer, just like Matthew Brady, had to look, it's upside down and backwards. So you had to, it's a tricky kind of camera to use, not nearly as user-friendly as a 35 millimeter. But Dick worked very fast with it. I'll show you some pictures of him, how speedy he was with it. But 2 assistants, technical assistants, were always with him. And then the white seamless paper was taped up to this shady side of any building that we sort of came upon. And here he is talking to a rodeo contestant before he began shooting. And this is a man, just a drifter. We were up in Yukon, Oklahoma, and had just finished working on that drilling rig. And this man was walking by the side of the road as we were driving away. And Dick wanted very much to photograph him. And so we asked him, will you get into the car and we'll go to a place where we can set up this white seamless paper. And those were the days when you could do that kind of thing. And so he did, and he was a lovely man. What's interesting to me about, there you see the white seamless paper again, taped up to the shady side of this Texaco station. But what Dick was so intent, you'll see again as we move through these slides, how intense he is during a portrait session. And even when it was all over, as it is here, and he's just talking to the man, and we're taking his name and doing a Polaroid to make as a record of who he is and identify the film. Dick is talking to him, but you see he's standing in exactly the same way as the subject.
Yeah. What would they have talked about? Would it have been just idle chit-chat, or was...
No, I mean, Dick would have been asking, where you sleep at night. He said, I sleep by the side of the road. He said, I never really sleep soundly. I can hear a blade of grass move. And he was going across, this was in Oklahoma, and he was going, I think, to Georgia.
That must have been very different than the conversations he had in the fashion industry.
Yeah. But Dick, that was something that he was brilliant at. He was very, very good. I mean, he had an extra special with people, with anyone. I mean, men, women, right. Children. He was operating on a very high level. And here are 3 sisters that have fame in their own right. So they were not particularly impressed by Richard Avedon because they themselves were the president, the vice president, and the secretary treasurer of the Loretta Lynn fan club.
Oh my gosh, well, of course.
And they came from they come from Wild Horse, Colorado, where their father, who always was with them, here he is sitting on the film case, just listening to the conversation. And when Dick saw them at a sort of a carnival, a local gathering, he wanted to photograph them, but their clothes were so elaborate and kind of over the top that they didn't seem to be. Oh, I'm hearing a little something.
I'm not
Oh,
sure.
there's some music outside. Anyway, so he photographed them here, but it didn't really work. So we went to Wild Horse, Colorado, where they were in their own clothes, where they went out every day to work in the fields, and they said, we go in full makeup. And they were just great. I mean, they were smart and funny, and I kept in touch with them. And I remember talking to someone who went to high school with one of a young man who went to high school with one, and they said, oh, they were just great, those sisters. But here you can see the intensity with which he's working, that he, was just hyper. And the assistants work very fast, too. To see one checking the aperture, the other waiting to load a fresh sheet of film. But Dick has rushed up to check, the focus and the look in their eyes. And when the exhibition was here at the Amon Carter, which some of you may remember, and everyone who was in the book and had been photographed by Richard Avedon was invited to come to the exhibition. And so I was in charge of calling and saying, well, now, this is when it will be, and we hope you'll come. And so I said to them, did you get the book? Yes, we did, because the book was sent ahead of time. How did you like your picture? Well, that's the reason we're coming. We're going to wring his neck. So this picture, this series that I've taken, ended up being a portrait of a man who was covered in bees, and it's become a very famous, iconic picture. But it began by one of my children was at school and came home from school one afternoon, and Dick was sitting in the kitchen, and so Andrew said, I saw the most amazing thing, you won't believe it. There was this guy who came to class today, and he had a beard of bees, and we said, what? And so he explained what the man, how he did it, and so I think that's really would be an amazing portrait. So Dick put an ad in a beekeeping journal, and 40 or 50 people replied saying, yes, I'm a beekeeper and I'd be happy to do a bee beard for a portrait by you. And but none of to send a Polaroid, but none of the Polaroids appealed to him that much. And so but this man, Ronald Fisher, sent the Polaroid, and Dick said it was like answered prayers. And so here he is with the bees on him and in the middle of the portrait. And the man on the left is the entomologist, Norman Gary, who brought, some 550,000 bees to the sitting. And then here I'm between the camera and the assistant holding the sheet of mat board to protect the camera from light, and but you can see that the portrait itself is cropped just below his chest. And we went to many oil fields in Oklahoma and North Dakota and the Austin Chalk, and looking for faces to photograph. And this is an example of, sometimes the the foreman was enlisted, foreman and the tool pusher, I think, were enlisted to hold up, to protect to eliminate light from the man's face. But this is an interesting sitting, because Dick was interested in the man on the left, who name is Roberto Lopez, and I saw him sleeping under a pickup truck, and he'd been at work for 48 hours. Now, this was when the Austin chalk was just booming, and the rigs were running 24 hours a day, and so Dick was very interested in photographing him, but he was very shy and hesitant. But his friend was full of swagger and confidence, and he said, "Well, yeah, I'll do it." And so the friend stood in front of the camera, was photographed a bit, and then Dick said to Roberto Lopez, "Would you step in too?" Which he did, and Dick photographed him a few more times, all the time being very aware of the man on the left. Waiting for him to sort of gain confidence and be comfortable in front of the camera. And then he moved out the man with all the bravado, who knows where his picture is. And then this is the final, a portrait, my picture of the final portrait that was done. It's an amazing portrait, a very, very incredible head of this man. And it was a lot of fun being on the road. I haven't shown this picture very much because it seems a little lighthearted, and and the project itself was so serious, and the work that the people did was so serious and hard and dangerous oftentimes. But nevertheless, you can imagine driving, 10 hours, 12 hours, 8 hours. So Dick had always used a Rolleiflex camera. And we were in New Mexico. I think this is outside of Gallup. And he said, "Rollie Mortuary," because he called the Rolleiflex a Rollie. That was it. And so he said, "Rollie Mortuary, oh my God, this is where I want to be buried." And so he hops out of the car, gets the two assistants to hold him, and I do the picture. We were up in Wyoming, Reliance, Wyoming, in tunnel coal mines, and also in Montana, in copper mines. And again, the hard work and the speed with which the men go in underground and come out underground, and working so hard in mining. Dick would often, he never sort of turned off, so that at night he would make little drawings in his room, and the next day, this is an example, he brought 2 sketches to the location where we were photographing the coal miners, and you can see the drawings of what he is imagining he will be able to get. Here are 3, again, under the black cloth, just like a 19th century photographer. And he's not doing it to repeat the 19th century, he's doing it because the resolution is so great and the detail is just amazing with 8x10 film. So that's the reason he's using that camera. And he used it, as you could see when he was photographing the Loretta Lynn sisters, he used it so fast. He used it as fast as one might use a 35mm camera, because he had the 2 assistants so that he could work very quickly. Here he's under the cloth just getting the focus correct. And these 3 brothers, the Timmons brothers, this is in Paonia, Colorado, and they had just come out of being trapped in the mine for 19 hours. The mine, the shaft caved in, and the only way they were able to stay alive was to go to the face of the coal where the machinery is cutting into the coal and putting their heads in among the pieces of equipment in order to get air. To breathe.
And was that just happenstance that
yes.
you were there at that moment? Wow.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so the miners were a special group of people, as you can imagine, to go down underground and work for 8 hours and work in, maybe some of you have been in tunnel coal mines or copper mines, but I mean, it's very hard
It's a
work
hard
and
life,
hard work, and it's also disoriented. It's black, and the sound is not in, but you hear the water coming through the leakage through the ground, and the light is only from the lamp on the miner's forehead, and it's dangerous because of the other gases, so methane, for instance. And what some of the miners did in the smaller mines, particularly when they were, it was hard to get a job, that they would turn off those things which identified the methane, and then they'd work in the danger of methane coming in just to keep working. And
wow. So, and that was an economic decision
yes,
on their part, wasn't
yes,
it?
yeah, Andrew. And here you see again that that's the look that Dick had when he was. What happened here? He was talking to the miner, and I snapped a picture, and so my camera, the Nikon, makes a fairly loud click, and so you can see him turn around quickly in this kind of, irritated look. But
did you get that look occasionally?
Yeah, I mean, what it is you're concentrating. So when you're the photographer, you have the responsibility of the project and the thought of the Amon Carter in 5 years. Where are these pictures? Are they going to hold the wall?
Well,
that was always in its mind.
I bet. And you said it was a risk for the museum. I'm sure it was a risk for him, too.
Yes, it was. Because he thought, well, maybe I'll fail. Here is a failure. This is an example of, he thought, well, maybe this is a picture. No, it wasn't, as you can see.
Was that clear pretty quickly?
Yes. But how could you resist the man on the buffalo? This is an example of how many of the people were so moving, their stories, and you think, well, how do you get to really know someone? But again, the photographer works quickly and fast, and you know much more than you might think one would know. And so this young woman, who was only maybe 17, was working as a carney. She was living with an older, much older man, and we heard her story and we're thinking, oh my gosh, you all wonder what has happened to these people, and are they even still alive? And so you can see Dick being pleasant and saying goodbye to her, and she in a very jaunty way saying goodbye to him and to the other two assistants. But you can see the expressions on their faces of concern and apprehension, and we often had that.
Like wanting to protect.
Yeah, yes, and thinking, well, there's just no way you're going to make it. So young, and so.
That's hard. That must have been difficult.
Yes. And then this is the last picture ever taken of Dick. That, as I think, Andrew, you said Dick worked for the New Yorker. At the end of his career, when this would have been in 2004. So it was a considerable time had passed since 1985 when the project for the Amon Carter ended. But Dick was doing a big project for the New Yorker, and he had wanted to go, as I said, to come back to Texas, and he was working at the Burns Center in San Antonio. And this young man had just been flown back from Iraq, where he had burned over, 60% of his body, and his face was completely scarred. And that's a mask that the surgeon puts on the face to keep the scars from sort of being raised, as swelling, I guess, as they're healing. But in any case, you see the expression on Dick's face. And this is the last picture he ever took, was of this young man, and the last picture ever taken of him was this one where
Is that right? Wow.
I'm photographing him. So
That's remarkable. Well, it's remarkable because I want to dig into a little bit.
Sure.
And I'm going to use a quote that you chose, or that was chosen as the introduction to the 2003 book, Avedon at Work. So you had Larry McMurtry write the introduction to that. And he said something in there that struck me because I'm intrigued by this gap between subject matter that gets continued into individuals who are coming through trauma or struggle or economic circumstances
hardship.
that are not typical of what Richard had done prior. So he knew the well-heeled and the fashion world, which presents a very different artifice to what he's unpacking in this work. And McMurtry wrote that the photographs to him constituted a radical break with the long dominant lyrical pastoral tradition of Western photography. And you've said as much as well in that book that this was not the John Ford West. This was a very different West. And I'm curious because in the romantic tradition of the American West, which we're well aware of here at the Carter and Frederick Remington and Charlie Russell, what do you think McMurtry was referencing in specific? That was this, I understand the movement away from the romantic view, but why was that important, do you think?
Well, I think that Avedon, he was photographing himself, and he was photographing what was within him and his inner challenges and demons and interests, so that all of these portraits really reflect him, are a reflection of him. And I think that he wasn't setting out, he wanted very much to be respectful of these people that he photographed, of the people that we met, and he was, I think. But it's a hard, relentless look at it. For instance, I just came back from Paris, where this whole exhibition that you have here at the Amon Carter is shown at the Foundation Cartier-Bresson in Paris, and it's 124 photographs that were all done as work prints. They're 16 by 20 inches, and they were done as work prints to make these huge prints that you have here. And I was struck seeing everything because it was all in a line like this around the exhibition space, that it is very hard look at American workers, and it's relentless, but it's not untrue. So I think that's what I would say about it.
And I think for me, I mean, from the perspective of what the museum's doing, and also in the tradition of representing the American West, let's just say as a subject matter, there is a tendency to show what is real life instead of imagined myth. Because in many respects, and this is where I think the revolutionary aspect of this commission is that it unveiled that powerfully, perhaps for the first time, and gave permission to creatives and others to actually acknowledge that as being the reality of how the American West came to be what it is.
Yes.
Which is built on extraction, that's built on, it wouldn't exist but for those who were in those mines were on the oil fields. It's not the guy in the office who's, making perhaps the most benefit from it. They certainly play a role. But the populace is that way. And I was just intrigued in reviewing all of this and reading your Avedon at Work book, which is a brilliant book, by the way. I know it's available tonight, and Laura's agreed graciously to sign copies after this. But it's a brilliant book, not only for the narrative, but for the design of it, in my opinion. I just think it was great. But I sort of was like, wow, you were the guide, but you all really uncovered an element of lived experience at a high level of aesthetic presentation that gave legitimacy to the subjects, I think, in many regards, where they hadn't necessarily been acknowledged before. And perhaps, and maybe I'll turn this into a question now, perhaps Do you think that is part of why some people had a hard time with the show?
Yeah,
when it
definitely. In fact, what you've just said is very, very unusual, almost even today, because so many people took such offense. This isn't the West. John Sikowski, the head of the Museum of Photography at the Museum of Modern Art, the most important voice at that time in America, said, "This isn't the West as I see it." Well, really?
From your New York office?
Yeah, and because I had a good experience. We were showing these pictures to an orthopedic surgeon in Billings, Montana. And so he was looking at, maybe 20 or 30 of the pictures, and he just went through them, and, one after the other. I think, gosh, I wonder what he's thinking of, this collection of pictures. And he said, "These are the people I see Monday morning. They come off the reservation in Hardin, Montana, and they've been drinking and fighting, and this is what I see Monday morning." And so I think people, the more removed one was from the life of these people, the more offense was taken by the body of work.
Yeah.
But now, I think I was telling you, Andrew, I was talking to a very good photo editor in London, and he said, hardly a week goes by that a young photographer doesn't come in showing me pictures that have been influenced by this collection of photographs. So
That's remarkable. I mean, and that's the risk paid off for both
the museum, yeah.
and the museum.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope the museum is more willing to look and see these pictures than they have in the past.
That brings up a point, actually, which is in the case of, and it kind of switches things, because what you and I have also talked about, which I think is equally as important as anything regionally identified with this project, which is how this effort changed portrait photography as well, and how a portrait got reimagined, maybe. I mean, and I think about it also as a way of moving away from tradition, but it means an acknowledgement of these photographs, these portraits, as physical objects, right? And so I just wondered if you might talk, you've mentioned already some of the elements that went into it, a traditional
Printing.
Image as well.
Yeah.
But what about the production of the work?
I think I have a couple of pictures of the production. Here it is. So this is in New York. These pictures are so large. Often the people, for instance, here, larger than life size, so they couldn't be done in the studio, in Dick's studio in New York. So they had to be done in a commercial lab in New York, Modern Age. And so here are the two assistants who are out on the road with us, and they're on the left you see the enlarger, and the sheet of paper is put on a metal sheet, a wall of metal, and it's magnetized. So the magnets are what holding the sheet of paper on the wall. So instead of working, as some of you may know, in a traditional darkroom with a projector comes down and you're working in front of you, this is working on the wall. So you can imagine that complexity. And then just handling these big prints was very, very difficult. And what they're doing, what the two men are doing, and they're burning and dodging. So they're adding a little bit more light in one area and a little bit less light in the other area. And just depends. There would be sometimes 60 different manipulations on one photograph. And Dick, coming out of the tradition of very good photography, growing up with that, and having worked all his life in traditional photography, he expected that of these prints, and that was very difficult. You'll never see prints like this again. And this is all paper too. It's not digital, of course. So they're not only are they beautiful prints, but they're unique, I think.
Well, they're almost like one of a kind.
Yeah.
In that regard.
Yeah.
Which, makes it difficult for us oftentimes to show them as frequently as we might want to, because they're friable in the same way that all works on paper have some limitations. So it's kind of this interesting paradox.
Yes, that's right.
Which it exists in the book, and
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that the Foundation Cartier-Bresson has done what they've done, because
Yes.
they've been able to use a more adaptable
Yes.
format
Yeah.
to show this series.
Right.
Where much like, your photo editor in London said, it's maybe a week or two doesn't go by where a museum wants to borrow the work.
Yeah.
And they're just too fragile to be able to do that unless you intervene with encasing, which then takes away from the physical experience of these remarkable, large-scale, printed on aluminum
Yes.
body,
Yes.
works as far as that goes. So I find it
Yes.
extremely, and I want to believe that Richard Avedon knew what he was doing about all of that in the whole process. I'm sure that's my hagiography of him, but there is this kind of push and pull in the
Right.
process.
You're exactly right. And I think what's happened is they're mounted on aluminum, which is causing challenges. But here are, at the end, 5 prints have been printed. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 have been printed, and they're going through the baths in the commercial lab to cleanse them of the chemicals.
And then would Richard Avedon choose from those 5
Yes.
what was to be
Yes.
presented?
Yes.
That's
So
amazing.
you have one of these 5.
Right, exactly.
And then, and you can see that they're larger than life size because the 2 young men. And then this is an example of someone at the end of the project, as I was gathering pictures to have this book printed. Dick said, "Well, where did this picture come from?" And I said, "Oh, it's a picture of you. You were talking to this drifter." He said, "Well, who's he?" And I said, "Well, I don't remember." And he said, "Well, why isn't he in the book?" And I said, "Well, because you destroyed the picture." And what happened was that he decided of 752 photographs that he took of people all over the West over 6 years. He chose 124. All the rest he destroyed. He said, "I never should have destroyed it. He has a great face." So anyway.
And you couldn't do volume 2 at that point, right?
That's right. So,
Well, it leads me to one final question around the project and getting as well to your ascendancy as an artist, off of the, let's say, as a growth out of this experience. So when I think about the tradition of portrait making, there's it's sort of an assumed agreement between the subject and the artist,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
In doing this, and
Yeah.
certainly it didn't always function as high art. A lot of times it had a more personal or domestic or even commercial effect. So in thinking about the impact of this project, and you as a photographer who's continued the portrait tradition as well, what do you, who in this practice of portrait making has been most impacted by the shift that Richard Avedon introduced, do you think? The subject or the artist?
well, I think that the photographers have been very influenced by his work. You see it all the time. You see it in advertisements. So that he has been enormously influential. And I think that the people, the subject doesn't, well, I shouldn't say. There was a coal miner, his name was Hansel Burham, and when I called 5 years later and said, we were the photographers who came to Paonia, Colorado, and there's going to be an exhibition, and you got the book, I hope, and would you like to come? And I said, "Do you remember us?" And he said, oh yes. And almost every single person remembered the experience, because the other thing was, at first they thought, oh, it's just a little snapshot. It's like nothing. But they could see the intensity and the seriousness with which Avedon worked. And that big camera really has a presence so that you know it's just not a snapshot. And so to have 2 assistants and Dick himself at the camera. The other thing about the camera, the Deardorff camera, is the lens is right here, and he would often be standing exactly next to the lens. So unlike with a 35 millimeter camera, where or even the Rolleiflex, where you're looking down into it, his head was right at the lens, and so the person, I mean, I have pictures of him where he's just tapping the edge of the lens of the camera. So he's sort of encouraging the person to look right at the camera, but his head is right there. So he's interacting,
He's really
not telling them how to look or how to be, but just sort of heightening what he's seeing that comes from them. And was a brilliant way to work.
That's incredible.
So,
well, before we get to the audience questions, which we'll do in just momentarily, I don't want to miss the opportunity to, in this context, to acknowledge your latest, or one of your latest efforts, which is The Riders, Portraits by Laura Wilson, which was sponsored and created in conjunction with the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Hook 'em. Just do that right there. But it is a portrait project.
A couple pictures of.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, that would be great. And just talk about the project and whatever shadow of Richard Avedon existed as you went through it.
Okay, well, this I think is this is the exhibition that's going to be in September at the Meadows Museum, and it's photographs I've taken over the last 30 years in Mexico. And so you can see, can you see the influence of Richard Avedon? And then here, in color, it's mainly in color. And I have combined images. So that was the first image I ever took, first photograph I ever took in Mexico, the one on the right. And I mean, it just seemed, you may have seen this yourselves when you're traveling in Mexico.
It's really remarkable.
But these two wonderful little schoolgirls in Nuevo Laredo. And then this combining the two pictures. So it's a diptych, but it's, as you can see, two different pictures that I have sandwiched together. And then I've kind of amped up the color to give it a kind of hyper. So the picture on the left was taken in Michoacan, and the one on the right was taken in Oaxaca. And then this is the project that I had completed a year or two ago for the Ransom Center at the University of Texas, and it was a wonderful project to work on, a dream project that I took a long time to complete it just because it was so hard to get access to these great writers, but there are 38 or 39 of the greatest writers of our time, and those writers that I thought would have, and the Ransom Center considers, will have a lasting literary legacy. So Zadie Smith on the cover here, and then Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I think this picture is in Colombia right now, and so he was, imagine being able to photograph Marquez. And that was in Mexico City. And then I tried, again, in the way that Life magazine did photo essays, where you would have a portrait of someone, but then you also would have what is called reportage, snapshots, documentary pictures of people. So this is Cormac McCarthy, and I think it's a quite unusual picture of Cormac McCarthy because he was famously difficult and didn't allow anyone to photograph him for about 20 or 30 years. And so I was lucky to get, these are his two friends, and I was lucky to get them in such convivial, nice way. And then Margaret Atwood. So in any case, that's
Well,
I don't know if that answers your question.
I was going to say,
but
you've carried the tradition forward in a way that I think not only honors the creativity of Richard Avedon, but also celebrates your own innovations within that.
Well, thank you.
So we're grateful not only for your historical perspective, but also for the artist that you are today. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you for your very good questions.
This is the moment you've all been waiting for. You get to ask Laura Wilson a question.
All right, as a reminder, we're going to use the microphone to ask your questions, so it's on the recording for YouTube. So I'm going to pass the microphone down the row.
A quick question. When you say he destroyed the prints, did he actually destroy the negatives as well?
Yes.
And then I'm curious about the paper that was used, the very large format paper. Did y'all have to have that specially made, or was that actually?
No, that was AGFA paper.
Okay.
So it was commercially available, but it was the best quality available.
I'm impressed by your memory. By the way, recall, 40 years ago, the names of the people, which I'm sure the encounters were etched in your brain, but I'm 77 years old and I can't remember who I talked to last week. But I congratulate you on your being able to, not only for your own personal benefit, but to share it with others who admire your work. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think what it is the people made such an impression on each of us, and to see the work that they were doing, the difficulties under which many of them worked, and it was a remarkable experience.
Okay, I saw, yep, there's a hand in the front.
Did you take this photograph of Richard Avedon, the one that's on
Yes, I did, and I'll tell you.
wonderful photograph.
This is his heyday, as you can imagine.
He's a handsome guy.
And
Yes.
he came. This was one of his first trips out from New York, and he really had not been in the West very much. I mean, he had gone to Paris to work in fashion. He, of course, worked in a sort of maybe 10 square blocks in New York, spent most of his life. But he is here, and he had the tie he was very proud of. It was made by, in Chimayo, a woven tie, and it had crossed arrows, which he was very impressed with.
Wonderful. And if you can tap into your wonderful memory again, why were the three Loretta Lynn sisters barefoot? I was struck by that.
Well, I think it was more one thing that's very important with this particular camera is the depth of field. By that I mean the focus. So your eyes can be in focus and your ears could be out of focus with that big camera. And so he would have them on the most, sort of really settled onto the ground. And I think that's probably why they don't have their shoes on, that they're just standing, they have a more solid base so that they won't sway. With the wind, for instance, or movement can sway them just a little bit.
Do you think that's why they wanted to wring his neck?
No, I think they saw their pictures.
You were talking about Paris. The Parisians are interested because it's Avedon, because it's photography, because of the subject. How did that all come about? Does this happen around the world?
In other parts of the country? Well, I think Europe is very interested in, they've always been interested in the American West. And so this project, because it represents a version of the American West, is of great interest to them. And because of young photographers being so interested in Avedon. And so the exhibition, which is in Paris now, is going to Spain, and then it may go to Italy and other places. But I think that Europe, as you know, has always been interested in the American West. So, for instance, objects were collected by German travelers and Northern European travelers.
Yeah, 100%. That's been a long tradition, really.
Yes.
And both in the collecting of material, especially indigenous material.
Yes, exactly.
But also, Buffalo Bill had a good tour throughout most of Europe in his day.
That's right. There's a great picture of that Larry McMurtry used in an essay that he did of Native Americans in a gondola in Venice. And it's just great. And I was dying to find it, and it's in the Denver the Denver
right?
Archives of the Denver Public Library, and of course they won't get rid of it.
Okay, we have one over here.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Andrew. I had a question that always struck me about this project was the framing of these photos. Why was the decision made that these large photos were on steel rather than a traditional frame or a float? Can you talk a little bit more about the that decision making in terms of like the final presentation of these images?
I think Avedon wanted them to be very accessible, and as you know, glass or even non-glare glass is off-putting. And so the idea that you can look at these prints with nothing between you and the paper, it is amazing. But it's difficult because paper breathes, and the aluminum is much more stable, and so it causes the problems that Andrew has found.
Yeah, there's always well, you'll notice in the show there's a stanchion barrier throughout, and that's to encourage distance. I think the curators, and John can weigh in if you want, there's always some anxiety around people in front of these, because if you touch them,
Yeah.
you
Fingerprint.
you ruin it
Yeah.
irrevocably for all time. So there's that quality of the work that, again, I think is almost paradoxical to
Right.
part of the process.
I think in retrospect, it maybe wasn't a wise thing, but he was so anxious for the experience to see a photograph, to see a big, beautifully printed print and have nothing between you and
it is
So,
powerful.
yeah.
Those the triptychs upstairs.
Yeah.
That one just blows my mind.
Yeah,
It's so
that's-
remarkably, monumental, but it's also there's a creativity that belies the realism.
Yeah, the flow of.
Yeah. So,
Also, when I was looking through to gather slides for this, I saw a picture of the raw print, the raw photograph of that triptych, and you can see there's the sunlight, or not sunlight, but the bright overhead light is hitting the forehead of some of the miners,
Yep.
and then in the other ones, it's so dark you can't see. But then with this very skillful adaptation in printing those photographs, this has been evened out. So they have added light to give flesh here, and protected the eye, dodged the eyes so that they're now open and you can see in them. The manipulation on the photographs was a lot. And people don't know how to do that anymore.
No, they don't. You're right.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions on the side of the room. So here we go.
And just on time, we have about 5 minutes, Madeline.
Hi, Laura. I have maybe two questions. The one is, what f-stop did he shoot at? Because I have a DIRDOF 8-button film
I just want
camera.
to say right now, don't ask Dick, don't ask me. We don't know anything about f-stops. We don't know anything about shutter speeds. We just we choose the face and take the picture.
Okay. So, one of the other thing about photographers is whenever they go in the camp or the outside, something is flowing off. So I was always wondering, did you come across the incident when the camera fell off because of the wind, or the backdrop flew off and people were running for it? Is there anything story like that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
So what happens when the photographers go out in the field to take pictures? Either something is flying off, Like if you take the lights with you, they will fly off because of the wind, or if you have a backdrop that Dick is doing, putting it on the back. Something blows away.
Well, we always chose a place that would be protected from wind. And So that wasn't, the big thing was the person going out of focus, which happened in wind or just lack of concentration. That was another reason why Avedon worked very fast, was because there's an optimum time to take a picture of a portrait of someone, so that no matter how patient the person might be, they begin to lose something, and you don't see it necessarily in the body, and you don't even see it in the face, but you see it in the eyes. That after a certain period of time in front of the camera, you just there's a kind of down period. So he always he did work quickly in order to get that right away before he would lose it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we're going to do 3 more questions, but let's make them quick.
Hello. Well, you seem to know quite a bit of the post work. Was there any cropping done post work and then those lines of the camera put back in? Because those are rumors going around, and now I want to know from a reliable source.
The question is, was there cropping?
Was there any cropping? Yes.
Well, the black edge of the frame, the back edge of the photograph is the edge of the frame, and so no, he didn't crop. Once the photograph was taken, that's it. So he, unlike news photographers or any other photographer, take crops and enlarges, but he didn't do that.
Hi, Andrew. Robert Langham from Tyler. Good to see you. Laura, we met, I bumped into y'all at Santuario de Chimayo in '80, I think at Easter.
Wow.
And looked over and saw the setup,
Yes.
and I thought, this must be Avedon doing that. But my question is, he's bound to have said something kind of typically or while he's photographing somebody. What is he? Did he say anything?
Well, as I said, he really was good with people. I mean, anyone. And there was one time, there was a man who was sitting having breakfast in a truck stop, and he just seemed completely separated from reality. And so Dick was watching him, I was watching, the 2 assistants. Well, would he be good subject, yes or no? Just kind of trying to decide what to do. And Dick said, well, yes, let's go ahead and try. Go ahead and speak to him, Laura. And as I got up and walked down from where we were sitting down the aisle to where he was, I thought, I don't know what I'll say to this person or why we want to photograph. He seems so unhappy. And so I went back to where we were sitting, and Dick, shot down and sat down next to him, began talking to him, and, made this amazing portrait of him. And so he didn't, he could connect with people. In the burn, that was another thing in San Antonio, in those last pictures that he took. You see a boy who's 19 years old burned, and he's, in bed. He'd been in bed since he was picked up off the, battlefield, and he's in bed in San Antonio, and, what can you say? And Dick was very, very, he really could connect with people. In a way, I'm not doing justice to explaining it, but it was something that he really had a gift, and he cared about people. And he'd spent his lifetime in psychoanalysis, too.
Okay.
We have one in the front row.
Well, I've got like 5 people
Oh
who
my
have
gosh,
been raising
okay.
their hands from the very beginning. So we'll do this woman right here in the front, and this will be the last one. Right here. There's somebody here.
I'd like to please preface this question that I don't believe it's asked enough of men.
I'm sorry, you said what?
I just would like to preface that I don't believe that this question is asked enough of men, but I would like to ask you that from the first tenacious letter that you wanted to do this project to the 5-year project, I'm noticing that you're also in what I would imagine a very demanding era of motherhood. And I've always just been curious, since reading your book, how that worked to what you might want to disclose. Like, was it good luck, I love you, or was there a lot of correspondence? And also noticing, like, the photos I've seen of Dick in your home with the children, just if anything you have to share to other working creative parents about anything you notice of that impression on your children, or just how that lived on in your family home a little bit.
Well, that's such a good question. And I think, first of all, there's nothing more important than for the mother and the father of the children, more important than the career. And I don't know that any child really cares about the career of his mother or her mother. So I think it should all be done around, within the family. And my husband was very supportive of me, and he was very good with, we have three boys, and he was very good with them, so that he enjoyed being with them and didn't feel, oh, she's gone and I'm left. So it worked for us, but it's challenging, and I don't think you should ever feel that your career, what you're doing, is more important than is nothing more important than your children.
Well, with that, you have those who didn't get to ask questions, buy a book. You have 30 seconds to talk to Laura while she signs it. And Madeline, do you have any further instructions?
Yes, so we will be doing the book signing in the main gallery. So where you came in from the front doors, we'll be lining up there. There will be some stanchions. There, as last I heard, there were still books for sale in the shop. So yes, grab a book, get in the book signing line. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question, I think everybody had a question. So apologies if you didn't get yours asked. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Andrew, very much.